Thank you for waiting for us. And I'm sorry, I should explain that I'm not Deepa Mehta or Salman Rushdie. This, as you know, is Rahul Bose. And there's been a small change in the program because the panel has changed so frequently. David Hamilton's not well. Ms. Mehta was unable to make it. And as you know, Salman Rushdie was disinvited by the special branch, which is a pity. Years ago, as a student in the city, I went to one of the famous College Street bookstalls to buy a copy of Midnight's Children. And the bookseller looked at me and he said, "You can't have it." And I said, I have enough money. And I pulled out 1 rupee coins to demonstrate that I was actually for once solvent. And he said, "No, you have to read this first." And he gave me Grimus, Rushdie's first novel, made me read it, and then the next week took a little exam, and then having ascertained that I was worthy, reluctantly handed over a battered second-hand copy of Midnight's Children. I hope someday that the city will be able to welcome him rather better. Rahul Bose will take questions about censorship, since both the films that he's involved with have run into these issues, but we'll do that towards the end of the session. And what we're going to talk about today is just books, films, and the making of Midnight's Children. And I was wondering whether we could start by talking about your history of reading and your history of watching cinema, both of them both before you became an actor and after. Did you have a stronger preference on one side or the other?
I wish I could say, like all highly successful Hindi movie actors, that I don't read and I don't watch cinema. But since I'm not, obviously I do read and I do watch movies. I think, Nilanjana, what happens is that you grow up with a certain imagination that is governed by the school you go to, or the kind of socio-cultural milieu you belong to. And so your reading choices are obvious. So for me, they were obviously the kind of choices that anybody of my ilk would make, which would be, largely American writers, largely Western writers writing about topics that I had no clue. But they were still wonderful. I mean, there was the time of Philip Roth, and I think Jay McInerney was writing, and so I grew up in the 80s with all that stuff. And so were my movies. I mean, I think, like, I don't know how things are right now, but I grew up watching the entire De Niro oeuvre, the entire Nicholson oeuvre, the entire Pacino oeuvre, thinking that that was cinema. And then in college, when I didn't attend 3 years of college, so I just sat and watched movies and read books. That is when I saw the Opoo trilogy. Yes, I think I saw Ghatak only after that. And I just saw the trilogy, and it was on video. Are you from the video era?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Just about the videotapes.
So it was video cassettes. At that time, then the reading began to become, and even the film viewing began to become very much what is known as world cinema today. Whether it was Buñuel, or whether it was Ray, or whether it was Japanese, say Kurosawa, or whether it, it was all of that. And so the reading. Then it was Murakami and Amitav Ghosh, and there was some of the British writers who one hadn't, not the obvious ones. So all of that began to slowly come into the reading.
That's one of the things that strikes me whenever we are talking about adaptations, which is that the divide between the book and film and whether one is better than the other, that seems to exist largely in the mind of critics, because when you're actually reading or watching, at some point you're caught up with the story, right? Much more than anything else. And I wanted to ask, after you became an actor, after you started acting on stage and on screen, did that change for you? When you looked at books, is it impossible for you to open them up and just read the story? Do you look at them and think, I want this part?
Well, I think that I was always the kind of person who imagined stories visually. So even when I would, as a teenager, narrate the story of how I embarrassed myself in a restaurant, it would always take the form of a movie. And I remember my brother-in-law saying to me that you always speak as if you're in the middle of some movie, And so I guess my imagination was fairly cinematic, and I didn't intend it to be that way, but maybe I was a product of the time. But as far as books are concerned, reading a book then and reading a book now and considering its cinematic possibilities, I don't think I really have, no, I don't think I really have changed that much. I've always looked at it visually. I've always made a series of visual pictures, but I do that with numbers also. I don't remember numbers. I make that into a picture. Yeah.
And you worked with 3 directors on 3 completely different books. English August, which was Upamanyu Chatterjee's, The Japanese Wife, which was made into a movie by Aparna Sen, and now Midnight's Children. Did you find that they approached books very differently when they converted them into, put them onto the screen? You can be tactful here if you want.
Sorry?
You can be tactful here if you want.
I can be?
Tactful.
Tactful? No, no, no. I was just thinking how strange it is that all 3 filmmakers closely collaborated with the writers. Whereas I'm going to be making Moth Smoke, hopefully, at the end of this year. And Mohsen and I have never collaborated. And as Salman says, there are 2 ways to do books into films. One is a very close collaboration, Aparna and Kunal. Kunal wrote The Japanese Wife, which was originally a short story called Kites. And Aparna began to talk to him about the possibility of making this into a movie, and they're very, very close friends till today. Close collaborators too at the time. Similarly with Midnight's Children. And also I know that Upamanyu and Dave Benegal, the director of English August, worked very closely on English August when Dave had conceived of it as a film. But it needn't have to be. As Salman said, and as we all know, there are, either you just take a novel and say, I'm going to capture the spirit and a certain through line. Boy meets girl, fall in love, boy's family hates girl's family, they've been fighting, they go away, they run away, tragedy ensues, girl dies, Romeo and Juliet. You don't worry about anything else. So you just look for the through line when you're converting a novel into a film, and then you add whatever you feel will add to the cinematics of that through line, but you don't bother about exploring all 7 levels. So, but in these 3 cases, they were all very closely collaborative processes between the writer and the director.
And completely different films, though. Some of them are more faithful to the book. Some give themselves the freedom to experiment to a large extent.
I think it's possibly more dangerous making a very good book into a film because of the nature of the medium. You're not going to satisfy everyone. It's perhaps a safer bet to take a mediocre book and make it into a movie, because then you can actually do things to it. But in the case of The Japanese Wife, it was a short story. So it didn't have all the texture and all the density that a full-blown novel would have. So I think Aparna in that respect had a easier time in terms of living up to the text.
And I would imagine that both Moth Smoke and Midnight's Children, that way they're so large and so detailed that they would be more of a challenge. But when you actually get into a role, do you go back to the book at all, or is there a point at which you detach from reading the original book and just stick with the screenplay?
Oh, no.
No.
I always go back to the book because the book is a product of 5 or 10 or 4 or 6 years of, the writer has lived through, you can hear each character. The writer must have inhabited 7 or 8 different characters. It must have been physically and emotionally exhausting. But they all, if it's a good book, they ring true. And so to actually look at those characters, re-look at them, you go back to the book. Because the screenplay will have the smell and the whiff and the spirit of the novel. But all the work that's been done has been done by the writer in the book. So whenever I have a book to go back to, it might even be a scene that is not in the final film or in the final script of the film. It might be something not. And so that could help you sometimes not sometimes, it will help you in coloring the spaces that the film, the gaps in the film, because the film can't keep telling you everything that happened to the guy all the time.
With Midnight's Children, in fact, you tried out twice, didn't you? I mean, you tried out for the role of Salim, and then as we saw, you ended later, many years later, with the role of Zulfikar.
Yeah, the moral of the story is that if you wait a long time, you will be relegated from the lead role to a bit role. And if you wait even longer, then you'll be relegated to the role of the audience.
Would you like?
Which is a lovely role, by the way. It's an astoundingly important role.
But you auditioned...
In these, intolerant times, the audience, yeah.
And you auditioned first 17 years ago. Was that 17 years ago? Was that right?
Yeah. So it was a 5-part mini-series, which almost seemed like a better idea at the time to take a book like Midnight's Children and convert it into a mini-series. And apparently, Salman was the final arbiter for the role of for who would play Salim Sinai, and he looked at 142 actors and finally chose me. And I still remember when it was a BBC series, and the BBC called. Somebody from the BBC called and said to me late at night, my time, but evening their time, that they would like me to play Salim. And I remember screaming into the phone because it's still one of the treasured roles for an Indian actor. You don't get many roles in world literature today for us to do. And I was screaming into the phone. I was so thrilled. And of course, then it all went south after that with the, okay, some can laugh. It went south because of the fact that there was a problem shooting it here. Then it was supposed to be done in Sri Lanka. And then we heard that the Saudi government had actually stepped in and voiced objections and blah, blah, blah. And the whole thing just unraveled. So that's the time I actually reread Midnight's Children. I had read it once as a reader. And then I read it once for the mini-series. And I was living with the book and then picked it up again because General Zulfi is somebody I hadn't really focused on last time around.
I've been meaning to ask this, but was it as iconic for you, the book, as it was for many of us in our generation, Midnight's Children?
Yeah.
The first time you read it, how old were you?
I just saw it as, the first thing, I didn't know who the guy was. I just said, this guy really loves this country. He loves this, the country, the city, his childhood. And I was having dinner with Salman 3 days ago, and he said he started writing Midnight's Children, which he even said yesterday at a session, as a story of his childhood, located specifically in Breach Candy and those, and he said, of course, it became something bigger.
And I mean, it expanded outwards. It became something like the history of this country as well. There was Bangladesh there, you had a bit of Pakistan, you had the emergency years, which was exceptionally moving, actually. Watching the film for the first time in Delhi recently, that particular section was striking because we haven't seen the emergency in film at all. But since you've already given us a little bit of General Zulfikar, I was wondering, could I persuade you to read just a little bit of Salim Sinai?
Oh yeah, with pleasure.
This is this isn't from the screenplay for this movie. This was from Salman Rushdie's original TV adaptation.
He actually gave me this.
Never got done.
This is the script, right?
Yes.
And I was so thrilled because the intro to this book, he mentions that I was cast in it. And then I lost this copy. I lost my copy of this.
I'll photostat it for you. I can't promise to give it to you, but from here to here.
Okay.
And
sure.
just Salim's voice.
So that's Salim. It says voiceover. I was born in the city of Bombay, once upon a time. No, that won't do. There's no getting away from the date. I was born in Dr. Narlikar's nursing home on August the 15th, 1947. And the time matters too. Well then, at night, on the stroke of midnight, as a matter of fact. Clock hands joined palms in respectful greeting as I came. Oh, spell it out, spell it out. At the precise instant of India's arrival at independence, I tumbled forth into the world. I wasn't the only one either. All over India, in that midnight hour, children were born who were also children of the time. Fathered, you understand, by history. It can happen, especially in a country which is itself a sort of dream.
At this point, we could open it up to the audience if anyone wants to ask questions about the film particularly, and then we could come back to the conversation. Is there anyone who has a question? Otherwise, we'll continue. There's one, the gentleman in the red sweater at the middle. Would you have a mic? And the lady out here. We'll just take 2 or 3 questions and then get back to the conversation so that it's a little less like one person relentlessly quizzing somebody who can't actually escape until I say so.
Hi, since we haven't seen the film, very intrigued about how has Deepa Mehta handled the magic realist portions, like for instance Salim's nose and all of that.
Well, Salim's nose is not magic realist, it's actually there, so that's prosthetics.
His sense of smell, the sequences in the slum and all of that.
I'll be giving the game away, but cinema has certain tools. Cinema has certain tools which are to do with, without getting into fancy CG, you can have a medley of voices. You can have dissolving many faces one over the other. You can have a different treatment for a certain character on the screen versus another, like Casper and the Ghost, or you get my point. So I think that, it's not that she's invented a new device, but she has used all the devices that have been used in the past, very interestingly, very interestingly.
You should really see the film. The lady in the front row.
Why make a film of a novel such as Midnight's Children? It doesn't seem to have a very sort of linear structure to it, and I would have thought that it would be a very difficult sort of task to do. To me, the novel does not follow a linear sort of stream of consciousness. It's very.
But a stream of consciousness is not linear.
It doesn't follow a certain. I mean, the events in the book are structured around history, the history of the subcontinent. But
you're saying that it would be a difficult book to film, in your opinion, because
it's not
too big?
Necessarily a linear sort of story. To me, it's very much.